Yara Gambirasio was born on 21 May 1997 in a small town named Brimbate de Sopra in Italy. Yara's whole life revolved around gymnastics. All of her friends did gymnastics as well, and she loved participating in competitions. On November 26 of 2010, Yara left her home at about 5:15 p.m. to go to the Brimbate de Sopra Sports Center, which was only 700 meters away. She was supposed to be only out for half an hour to an hour or so, and then come back home. At 11 minutes after 7 that evening, Yara's mother calls Yara, but it goes straight to voicemail. A few minutes later they called the police, since it was unlike Yara to not respond to their calls and be out later than she's supposed to. The police soon arrived, and also the military, which they called the Carabinieri. Hundreds of volunteers also helped search for Yara. The police tracked Yara's last movements. They found that Yara did make it to the sports complex and did some training. At some point after 6 p.m. she left the sports complex, and at 6:44 p.m. she texted a friend arranging plans to meet up the following Sunday. At 6:49 p.m. signals came from Yara's cell phone in a small town called Mapello, about 5 kilometers from where she lived. A few weeks after her disappearance, the police thought they had found a man responsible. They wiretapped the phone of a Moroccan immigrant by the name of Mohammed Fikari. Mohammed said something along the lines of "Forgive me God, I did not kill her." Mohammed worked as a builder in Mapello. In the back of Mohammed's van, there was a mattress with bloodstains on it. It wasn't Yara's blood, however, and apparently Mohammed's call was badly translated, so he was let go. Exactly 3 months after Yara disappeared, in 2011, there was a man that was flying his new remote-controlled airplane in an overgrown field that came across a lot of rags on the ground. He then noticed shoes, and he soon realized he was looking at a badly decomposed body of a young girl. The police immediately came and identified the young girl as Yara because of her clothes she was wearing. She had a couple of facial wounds that was caused by a blunt object. Her cause of death was hypothermia due to exposure. In her hand was a lot of grass that she was pulling out in her last few hours. On Yara's underwear, they found a tiny piece of DNA that did not belong to her. They called the suspect Unknown One. Using the DNA, they could determine that it was a 95% chance the suspect had blue eyes. The police took DNA samples of every person that met Yara or could have possibly known her. In 2011, they found a man that had a Y chromosome they were looking for. The man with the last name of Gambirasio was in South America at the time of Yara's murder, and his DNA was not a perfect match. So they knew it had to be a family member of this man that was the suspect. They found that a lot of people with the last name of Gambirasio lived in a town called Gorno. They started testing DNA in Gorno of everyone with the last name of Gambirasio. They came across a man by the name of Paolo Gambirasio, who was a 50% match to the DNA of Unknown One. This meant that a sibling of his must be the suspect. Paolo's brother also only matched 50% to the DNA of Unknown One, and it was not their sister. Paolo's father, called Giuseppe, had died 12 years earlier in 1999. It soon became apparent that Giuseppe had to be unfaithful for there to be another child who could exactly match Unknown One. The police used some of Giuseppe's personal belongings to get a sample of his DNA. They then found a middle-aged woman who could be the mother of Unknown One, Esther Arzufi. They found that Esther had a set of twins, one male, one female, and then another son. The male twin was a man by the name of Massimo Giuseppe Bossetti, who lived in Mapello with his wife and 3 children. After the police smartly obtained a sample of Massimo's DNA, they matched it with the DNA of unknown one and arrested him. Esther must have been unfaithful to her husband, because the twins are both Giuseppes. Interestingly enough, her 3rd child was also not her husband's. On July 1st of 2016, Massimo was sentenced to life imprisonment. Pamela Shelly was a 31-year-old woman from Texas. She had a daughter that was 12 years old and a son who was 9. Pamela had divorced her husband, and she was now living with a boyfriend, Ronnie Joe Hendrick. Pamela, her 2 children, Ronnie and his son, all lived together in a house in Texas. On January 6 of 2001, Pamela was busy packing up her and her children's belongings. Ronnie was abusive towards her, and she wanted to go back to her family in Arkansas. She was busy in the bathroom when her 2 children heard a gunshot. They rushed to the bathroom to find their mom in a pool of blood. Ronnie called an ambulance. He also climbed into the ambulance to guide them to the hospital in the quickest way possible, since he lived in a very rural area. This would prove futile, as Pamela passed away in the ambulance. When the police arrived at the house, they encountered Pamela's 2 children, who told the police that their mom would not do this to herself, and it didn't make sense. Also at the house was Ronnie's brother, another man, and Ronnie's mom, who really pushed the narrative that Pamela was suicidal and that she most likely killed herself. An autopsy was performed, and Pamela's death was ruled a suicide by the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office. In 2008, Officer Carl Bowen reopened the case. He strongly felt that justice was not served and that suicide wasn't what happened. There was also a show called Cold Justice that took on Pamela's case in their very first episode. They talked to Ronnie's brother, who claimed that Ronnie tried CPR on Pamela, which would not be possible since he had no blood on him that day. Carl Bowen then made a discovery that would finally get this case solved. Carl talked to Pamela's ex-husband Jesse. Jesse told him that he spoke to Pamela on the day that she passed away. He said that he was talking to Pamela on the phone that day, and then Ronnie took the phone from her and told Jesse that the next time he saw Pamela, she would be in a casket. Ronnie then confessed, and he was convicted and sentenced to 22 years in prison.
Joni Harper was a 39-year-old woman living in Bakersfield, California. She worked for the Bakersfield school system, and she was also a Division I basketball official. On July 8, 2003, a woman by the name of Kelsey Spann starts to worry about her friend Joni, who hasn't answered her phone for the last 3 days. Kelsey decides to check on Joni and her 3 children. As she enters Joni's bedroom, it's her worst nightmare. Inside is Joni, her 3 children, and her mother Ernestine, who had all been murdered. Marquez, 4 years old, and Marshall, 6 weeks old, were her 2 sons. Lindsay was her 2-year-old daughter. Ernestine, 70 years old, was a mother of 5 and also a civil rights activist. None of the neighbors had heard anything, and the police found no sign of forced entry, and nothing of value had been stolen. The police only had one thing to go on. One of the family members was missing. Joni Harper's estranged husband Vincent was nowhere to be seen. Vincent was the vice principal of John C. Fremont Elementary School in Bakersfield, California. He married Joni in 2000, but in 2001 they had their marriage annulled because Vincent had been unfaithful. Then, in January 2003, they remarried when Joni was pregnant with their 3rd child. Vincent moved out of the house in April 2003. Police quickly tracked down Vincent. He seemed devastated when the police told him about what had happened to his family. Vincent tells Detective Jeff Watts that he was visiting relatives in Ohio. There was activity on his credit card in Ohio on the day of the murders to back up his story. Vincent was 2,200 miles away when the murders took place, and he had evidence to prove he was in Ohio. They had no other leads, and the case went cold. They eventually went back to Vincent, and were surprised when he was no longer mourning and even ignored police. He could not seem to care less if police found the person who killed his wife and children. This led Detective Jeff Watts to take a closer look at Vincent's alibi. Receipts showed that Vincent flew from Bakersfield to Columbus, Ohio on July 2nd. When he got there, he rented a Dodge Neon. Vincent told Detective Watts that he only drove the car in the Columbus area. When the detective looked at the records, however, they found that Vincent had put 5,424 miles on the vehicle. When asked, Vincent had absolutely no explanation for this. Detective Watts was pretty sure that Vincent drove the car from Columbus to Bakersfield and back, but he had to prove it. Detective Watts flew to Ohio to have a look at the Dodge Neon. The car was cleaned by the rental company, so he found no evidence inside. What he did find, at first, seemed to be unimportant, but would blow this case right open. Detective Watts found a lot of bugs in the car's radiator, and suddenly came up with a plan. He thought to himself that surely the insects could reveal where this car had been. Detective Watts turned to an insect expert, entomologist Dr. Lynn Kimsey. Dr. Kimsey starts by removing every piece of insect she can find on the radiator. She found a bright red grasshopper, which is native to Oklahoma and Texas. This proved that Vincent drove outside of Ohio, but not quite that he drove all the way to Bakersfield, California. She then found a paper wasp. The paper wasp got its name from the papery material it creates when building a nest. Paper wasps are only found in California. This was the evidence that the police needed. The question remained, however, how was Vincent able to drive to Bakersfield and also make purchases in Columbus at the same time? Detective Watts contacted the stores where Vincent made his purchases. He also retrieved surveillance tapes from the stores. What they saw was Vincent's brother making purchases and signing as Vincent. In April 2004, police arrested Vincent and charged him with 5 counts of murder. He was found guilty of all 5 counts.